And good afternoon to some of you. Thank you, Sam. I'm Jeffrey Zuber, the co-founder and partner of Zuber Lawler, LLP. Zuber Lawler is a preeminent firm of about 50 attorneys on the forefront of several new and exciting industries, including crypto, cannabis, and of course, psychedelics. Our attorney qualifications are tops in the industry, and our hiring standards are second to none. We are on the forefront of deals in these new and exciting spaces, having done billions alone in the cannabis space. We also have top-notch litigators with some of the highest awards and judgments in cannabis, including a $66 million award in judgment on a single cannabis dispute. I'm also a co-founder of the magazine Psychedelia, and I host a podcast in association with the magazine Psychedelia, the podcast. We also have a stake in Psychedelics Today and work very closely with the magazine executives. In short, we are neck deep in this space and getting deeper. Let me tell you about some of our panelists. I'll begin with Sam Chapman. He's the executive director of the Healing Advocacy Fund. Sam was the campaign manager for Measure 109 and has more than a decade of experience advocating for progressive drug policy reforms at the local, state, and national levels. His previous experience includes consulting for statewide political campaigns, assisting local governments in writing rules and regulations, crafting and advocating for equitable access to emerging healthcare treatment options, and identifying new opportunities within emerging industries. In 2013, Sam co-authored HB 3460, the law that licensed and regulated medical cannabis dispensaries in Oregon. Sam has been a resident of Oregon for 25 years and holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Oregon in philosophy and political science. Thank you for joining us, Sam. Also with us is Sarah Hashkis, the Chief Technology Innovation Officer of Light Holland. Sarah is also CEO of Radix Motion, and she's utilizing her research in cognitive neuroscience focused on psychedelics, embodiment, and immersive technology to connect humans to their body and to each other. Sarah published the first paper on predictive coding and psychedelics back in 2017. She tried VR for the first time after a visit to Burning Man and pivoted her research, opening the first VR lab in the motor control department of Radboud University. Since completing her master's, she has been consulting and developing for many companies in the immersive field, from pain management at Karuna Labs, bias training in Debius VR, and empathy-driven learning in Facebook. She has opened her own company focused on increasing the bandwidth of human connection with immersive technology. Her prototype, called MEU, has been hailed as working towards realizing the work of Terence McKenna's vision by Douglas Rushkoff, and called Trippy and Super Compelling by Kent Bai. There are a number of links that I'm going to deliver for you that will help you introduce you to Sarah, which I will do once we get kicked off. Last but not least is our very own Lizzie Fank-Boner, an attorney at Zuber Lawler. Lizzie focuses primarily on plant medicine matters, including both cannabis and psychedelics. She has experience with deals, regulatory compliance, license applications, contract drafting, and other related regulatory and corporate matters. Particularly, she counsels dispensary owners, infused product manufacturers, cultivators, transporters, and other businesses, including those seeking new cannabis and psychedelics licenses, through the complex and interconnected state and local regulatory frameworks. Lizzie has represented clients before various regulatory authorities in connection with applications and license acquisitions. She has also assisted clients with conducting complex due diligence and identifying, reviewing, and drafting documents necessary for license acquisitions and applications. We may also have one more joining us, Todd Shapiro at Light Holland, but I'm going to save that because we are having some technical difficulties that we are trying to work out. But for the three of you who are able to make it, thank you so much for joining us. And let's kick it off. Sam, my first question is for you. What is Measure 109?
Thanks, Jeff. So in a nutshell, Measure 109 is a first of its kind program that allows anyone over the age of 21 that goes through a safety and screening process to have access to psychedelic services. Let me be clear, you do not need a diagnosis to have access here. The Measure 109 program is really a new path that says, everyone has an opportunity to gain something from psilocybin services. It's not necessarily for everyone, but there's a huge opportunity here to add a tool in the tool belt for combating not only mental illness and mental health, from depression to anxiety, PTSD, et cetera, but also people who are just seeking general wellness. And the Oregon program really creates a path that allows that. And so, the goal of Measure 109 is really to create a licensing framework under the Oregon Health Authority that allows anyone who may benefit to have access to services in general.
Does it have any parallels that you're aware of? Certain things, other jurisdictions, where you think that they're doing some of the similar things that Oregon is trying to accomplish with Measure 109?
It's a great question. I'm not aware of any type of program that is in the process of being built or currently in existence that allows this type of access for the general public in a licensed and regulated way. Of course, we have the clinical trials at the federal level, which are, I think, necessarily rigid to a certain degree, but also have a very high barrier to entry for so many people. And then on the other end, we absolutely are seeing a huge uptick in the removal of criminal penalties for possession of psychedelics and other drugs in general. I think both of these things are incredible and necessary in their own right. Measure 109 really starts to build a path in the middle that says, just because you're an ER doctor that's been practicing for 30 years does not necessarily mean that you know how psilocybin works and who it should or can benefit. And conversely, just because you've been doing 30 years of really good underground work does not necessarily mean you're ready to provide public services in a licensed and regulated type of manner. Measure 109 really encourages the entire spectrum of participants out there right now to come together to provide as much access as possible for as many people that stand to benefit.
Thank you, Sam. By the way, I'm not aware of anything at state or national level that compares to this as well. If someone has something, please share it with us in the chat. We'd be happy to discuss it. Sam, what type of licenses are available in Oregon? Can you tell the audience a bit about the differences between the license and certifications and how someone can obtain either one?
Yes. So there are 4 license types that on January 2nd, 2023, people will be able to apply for. I want to be clear. January 2nd, 2023 is not when services will become available. I think that's a misconception that's been confused in the media, and I want to make it very clear. Applications will be available on January 2nd, 2023 for the following 4 license types. The first is a facilitator. This is the person who's going to be with the participant throughout the entire psilocybin administration process. They'll work with them up front through preparation, the administration session itself, and then integration should a client want to pursue integration after an administration session itself. The second license type is the service centers. This is where psilocybin administration sessions will happen. I want to be very clear that, just as important as explaining what Measure 109 does do, there's some things that it does not do. There are no retail sales allowed under Measure 109. No one will be taking psilocybin home. There will not be any advertisements of products allowed. You're not going to be driving down the highway and see billboards for mushrooms. There's a couple of other things there, but I think, service centers are really going to be one of the backbones and the umbrellas in which a lot of the other license types operate under and work with. The third license type is production. This is the production of psilocybin mushrooms in general, and there will also be additional endorsement types for different types of products, mainly dealing with extraction, things of that nature. And the fourth and final license type is testing labs. Again, this is somewhat similar to cannabis in that there will need to be different types of regulations in terms of ensuring product safety and purity for the general health and welfare of the public. And I think that we'll see a lot of the existing cannabis labs apply to become psilocybin testing facilities as well. So those are the 4 license types. And as Jeff alluded to, there's an important distinction in the 5th entity that is not a license type, but is rather a certification. And this is training programs. This is where everything starts. The Oregon Health Authority has actually already opened up the application process for training programs. I saw Maya here from Sound Mind actually is one of the first training programs that's already been approved by the Oregon Health Authority. And so that is a certification process that OHA handles. And essentially, we did some really good work in getting the Oregon Health Authority to understand we need to have training programs up and running prior to 2023 in order for there to be licensed facilitators that then can occupy the service centers and actually hopefully start providing services in what I anticipate will be the fall or winter of 2023 after build out, real estate's been found, local government things have started to settle, etc. But those are the 4 license types, and then the 1 certification, all of which exists under the Oregon Health Authority.
Thank you, Sam. My next question is for you, Sarah. What type of psilocybin services do the people of Oregon want, and how much are they willing to pay for them based on the market survey that Light Holland has conducted?
Yeah, so maybe just a tiny bit about Light Holland. I think that was supposed to go into Todd's intro. We are the only publicly traded company, at least that I know of, that is actively promoting legal access to natural psilocybin for all adults. We are not a pharmaceutical company. We currently sell psilocybin products legally in the Netherlands, along with free support structures like access to a therapist for consultation and online preparation integration, as well as an app, a microdosing app, and a VR app that can actually prepare people when they go into smart shops here in the Netherlands. It's absolutely legal to walk into a store if you're an adult, and you can just buy psilocybin truffles. And we've deployed VR headsets with an experience to actually educate people what psychedelics do to their brain, along with best practices. And we are, of course, very interested in what's going on in Oregon because it's very aligned to what we really want to see in the world. A lot of the people in the company have benefited from psilocybin, like myself, not through clinical trials, right? Anybody right now who's really promoting this has benefited mostly not from clinical trials, but from actually either here legally in the Netherlands or from the underground market. So we did a really big market survey in Oregon that was based on the population of Oregon. We had some great statistical analysis done to make sure, all the error bars are there, and it's open and accessible to anybody. I can put a link later that wants to delve in a bit deeper. But what we did discover was that most people do want this for mental health. We've seen 84% of people said they would use this to help with mental health, but we also do see a lot of people that are saying they want this to help with increasing their creativity, 35%, explore their mind, 29%, explore spirituality, right? And I think it's really important to understand that when we are talking about mental health, it's about time that we start looking at this as a holistic experience. And this is really the difference that I hope psilocybin brings into the world. It's not just here, take a pill and good luck, but it is here, take a substance that can increase your neural plasticity along with support structures that can really help you take a look inside, figure out what's going on, look at your traumas from a different perspective, connect to nature, connect to your friends, and really improve this holistic experience of what it is to be a human. Another interesting thing we discovered, and this was actually, I was surprised about this, that many people really do want a licensed therapist to be their guide. 70% answered that they would prefer a therapist. But a lot of people also would love to just do psilocybin in nature, 38%. So there really is room for everything, both therapists and also just guided, facilitated experiences that are not in the therapy modality exactly. Now, when it comes to prices, there's a big gap between what sort of the maximum amount that people are willing to pay to what I believe we're going to see. We're seeing people are saying their maximum ability to pay for this is around $370. We know that these types of retreats that require one-on-one guides are much more expensive than this. So and we can talk about this a bit later, but how can we increase accessibility to this? We also have seen that many people, 86% of those who are interested in psilocybin are interested in microdosing, right? Microdosing means dosing in a lower amount that doesn't affect your hallucinations, doesn't really stop you from doing your normal day-to-day life, but can give you a bit more energy, can give you just a tiny bit of that extra plasticity. So we're seeing a lot of people are interested in that. We're seeing 47% are interested in a combination of microdosing and mindfulness, which we believe is really helpful and important, and is something that we're doing here in the Netherlands. Yeah, so that's a quick overview, but I really encourage people that are going to enter this market to take a deeper dive, to see all the sub breakdowns of these statistics in our report.
And how will they get it? How can they get their hands on that report?
Yeah, if you I can just post it in the chat now.
That would be perfect.
So, yeah, great.
My next question was, I'm just going to throw it out to the panel here because my next question was for Todd, but again, we had technical issues. We apologize for that. What can people who want to get access to psilocybin services do to support companies that are entering this complex market? So Sam, why don't we start with you?
It's an interesting question. And I think what people can do to support the companies is also ask themselves what they can do to support the entire community. Because this isn't just companies, this is a full community. And there's going to be a different shape and size and color for everyone. And so I think the first thing that someone who's interested in accessing services should do is actually inform themselves on the process in which, this program exists on. And I think that, there's a lot of information that exists in the text of the measure. And I think that there's a lot of information that's starting to come out on rules. We have a little over half of all of the rules already codified on products, training, and facilitators. And there's going to be more coming. But I think right now, from a participant perspective, the next 6 months is going to include a lot more education about what this is going to look like, right? Future service center operators are still, starting to figure out themselves what Measure 109 is, what it's not, what rules are coming. And then I think most importantly, how their business is going to be impacted by local regulations as well as it relates to time, place, and manner, what zones they can operate in, which cities and counties are even going to allow these businesses in general. So I think there's a lot more to come, but those are some of the initial aspects that I toss out there.
Fascinating. Sarah, Lizzie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd love to add that things are, as I mentioned, not yet set in stone. So it's absolutely the right time to get to come to the actual still the meetings that are happening, join in, listen in, speak your voice, especially connect to your local government. As Sam mentioned, we don't yet know which of these cities are going to adapt this, right? But we have a say here. So we can speak up, we can say to our city members and council members, hey, we really want this to come to our city. How can we do this together? I think this is really important.
I don't have much to add, but just to echo kind of what Sarah was saying would be to perhaps join some of the meetings and participate in the public comment when those timeframes are open. So just, informing themselves and participating in the process, as it's still going on for the next 6 months, as Sam mentioned.
And as a cynical lawyer, I have to always bring up the money. It's always good to have money, but it's not just in terms of investment. In terms of, again, drawing parallels to the cannabis market, which is not perfectly analogous by any means, but there's a very robust black market out there in cannabis. They even have this issue in Canada, from what I understand, in terms of, and it's federally legal there. And they're still dealing with a very robust black market, to my understanding. And you'll have a choice in terms of what type of where you get your products from. And the more you can support the legal market, the better off and more robust that legal market will become. Let's move on to the next question. Sam and Lizzie. What training programs are available? What hour requirements are needed? And what is the process of these training programs?
Sam, did you want to take that, or I can speak to it just a little bit?
Go for it. Yeah, happy to follow up.
Absolutely. So facilitators must complete a training program with a curriculum that's been approved by the OHA before they can be eligible to hold a facilitator's license after January 2nd, 2023. For the training programs, to have their curriculum approved by the OHA, the providers must submit an application as Sam mentioned, which is open now and the final rules have been adopted. The OHA will evaluate the training program applications to determine if the course meets the standards as set forth in the final adopted rules related to training. So a few things, the program's core training must include at least 120 hours of instruction. And this is broken down into specific hourly requirements for various topics, such as cultural equity in relation to psilocybin services and core facilitation skills. So it's pretty comprehensive. In addition, there's also a certain amount of hours of practicum training. And at least, I think it's 10 hours of consultation related to the student, the future facilitator, to their direct practice. So like Sam said, I believe there's at least one training program that has had their curriculum approved, but we will wait to see what comes down the pipeline for other training programs.
Anything to add, Sam?
I don't think so. No, that was great and succinct. There's a total, and I think they all just got put up maybe yesterday, or the day before. So there's a total of 3 training programs that have been approved thus far, and which is frankly, from an OHA turnaround perspective, from a bureaucracy, that's a really short turnaround time. That's like 2 weeks from when they opened the application period on June 6th, I believe. So, as much as the governmental agencies can often be slow and
Sam froze.
Uh-oh. Another technical problem.
Okay, I can take over on a different note, similar but different slightly, around the training. The question that I still have open is how are they doing the practicum? You're supposed to have 40 hours of on-job training. Usually it will be in a service center, but what do you do with the first cohort? So I messaged the OHA about this. They know this is an issue. My hope is they will allow things like actually doing training in the Netherlands where it's legal and facilitators can actually conduct a session themselves. But maybe Sam or Lizzie, maybe if the people who have been approved, how are they going to be doing the practicum, the 40 hours on-job training?
Yeah, practicum is definitely a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem, admittedly, right? This is the first program of its kind ever. We know that we needed to get, training programs to allow them to start training students now in order to have any services accessible in 2023. The issue with that is there are no products that are legal yet. And so that is a little bit of the conundrum in terms of the first cohort of trained facilitators may have some, problems that they're going to need to come up with creative solutions to. And that I think that's there's a lot of different ways that we could get into in which they could initially satisfy that requirement overall. I think the other thing is that a lot of suggestions have been tossed out that facilitators should have to go through their own experience with psilocybin, which I'm not opposed to. From a legal perspective, it's never going to happen. The state is not going to create a rule that forces people to violate a federal law, like it or not. That's just the reality of that side. So again, that's long story short, it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg, but hopefully, product licenses, I think, are also going to be, a priority for that exact reason for the OHA once application period is open in 2023.
And also, I see some of you are keeping track of what's going on in the chat, and some of the questions are being answered. We'll probably try and do if we have time, go through it completely and try and hit everything. Sam and Lizzie, can you tell us about the license considerations, including local jurisdictions, residency requirements, financial interest restrictions, and disclosure requirements?
Sure, Sam, I wasn't sure if you wanted to take the local, at least start us
I'll
off. I'll
take local, and then if you want to do the other licensing specific requirements, that's great. And apologies, my screen is freezing off and on to me if I'm not coming through.
Okay, so in terms of, we'll go back and Sam can cover the local jurisdiction, opt out, etc. But in terms of residency, so to start with, again, we don't know what the final regulations, how they'll define resident, because those final rules with that definition have not yet been adopted. However, perhaps we can look at other Oregon statutes and or rules to get an idea of what the residency requirements might look like. One such example is there's a statute related to personal income tax, or perhaps the prior residency requirements under the cannabis regs in Oregon. With that in mind, without getting into the weeds with speculation, the requirements for those that want to enter into this emerging ecosystem, a facilitator applicant will be required to provide proof that they've been an Oregon resident for 2 years or more. In addition, for manufacturers and service centers, for those license types, the requirement is more than 50% of the ownership interests of any entity that is to operate as either a manufacturer or a service center must be held directly or indirectly by one or more individuals who have been Oregon residents for 2 years or more. This requirement is in effect until January 1st, 2025. In terms of financial interest restrictions, the statute does contemplate a restriction on an individual's ability to have multiple financial interests in certain licenses. So an individual cannot have a financial interest in more than one manufacturer license, and an individual cannot have a financial interest in more than 5 service center licenses. Again, we'll go back to the issue with the definition being that the financial interest is not yet defined. So we do need to wait until the final rules come out to understand specifically what that will look like. But in the meantime, again, we can take a look at the Oregon cannabis rules, and the definition of financial interest there is pretty broad. So it basically be, an interest in the applicant or the licensee such that the performance of the business could cause or is capable of causing the individual or legal entity with which the individual is affiliated to benefit or suffer financially. So again, we'll wait and see how this develops to understand really what the financial interest will entail. And then for disclosure requirements, I'm kind of sounding like a broken record here, but without seeing the final rules and the actual applications, we don't know exactly what the applicant will need to provide in terms of documentation or disclosures with their application. But aside from the facilitator license, which is really individually held, and pulling from my experience in the world of cannabis licensing, generally speaking, licensing authorities would want to see where the money's coming from that's funding the applicant business, such as loan documents. If you can obtain a loan, which I'll touch on later, they may also want to see the operative corporate documents, such as an operating agreement for an LLC. They may require individual history backgrounds or something similar for people that are part of the business that are in a position of control or executives. Also, I'm thinking about proof of possession of the licensed premises where the license will sit, such as a lease or a deed if you own, and or diagrams of the licensed premises showing, for instance, camera location, the use of each room, ingress, egress, exits, etc. So again, unfortunately, we really don't know until we can see all of the final rules and the applications. But the point here is to maybe point out that in the meantime, good record keeping and documentation would be helpful.
All right, and I'll give a quick nutshell on local government. So Measure 109 allows cities and counties to opt out of the program if they so choose. Obviously, we want to work to ensure that we have as much access as possible, which really means we're working to educate all cities and counties in Oregon on what psilocybin is, what the research shows, what the measure is, what it is not, and how people in their communities stand to benefit from this. So, we also learned a lot of lessons from cannabis that we applied within Measure 109, one of which is state licenses run supreme. A city or a county cannot create its own specific psilocybin license. That was a huge barrier of entry that we saw in cannabis and an unnecessary additional cost to future licensees. And so cities and counties, again, they basically have three options. They can opt out entirely. And if they do that, it has to be a vote of the city or the council commission, which then goes to a vote of the people at the upcoming general election. So essentially, there's a very short timeline window we're in right now to where if a city or county wants to opt out, they need to have made that decision by basically the middle of August. So the Healing Advocacy Fund is actually in the middle of a lot of this work right now, educating a lot of different cities and counties to help as many people as possible to really understand the opportunity here and also to help address concerns. The other two options that cities have and counties have if they don't want to opt out is adopting reasonable time, place, and manner regulations. This is essentially zoning and hours of operation. And from my perspective, we're really going to encourage localities to really just focus on the zoning. The hours of operation, I personally am starting to feel could be very tricky. Service centers, if they start a session in the mid-afternoon, could go far beyond normal retail hours, right? And so in that regard, I do think we actually want to treat these service centers more like a medical facility as it relates to hours of operation, where they are not held to a 9 to 5 type of standard, because that would severely limit the amount of access and hours in which a service center could be operating and providing services. But overall, it's zoning and time and general manner, right? I saw my friend John Dennis here had a question about some of the things that we're seeing at the local government level. So many of these local governments literally have PTSD from cannabis because of the NIMBYism issues, right? And so 9 out of 10 conversations that I'm starting with right now are, this is not like cannabis because, right? There's no light pollution from psilocybin production. The amount of space that's needed for production is not anywhere equivalent to cannabis. It's not happening outside. There's just not, NIMBYism type of issues like there is with cannabis production generally. And so there's a lot of education on that front that we're trying to break through, and we're having success in some areas and we're having less in others. And again, I think I would encourage anyone who is a resident in Oregon that is interested in either accessing services or becoming a licensee to get involved locally. And I may sound like a broken record here, but if your business is politics, whether you like it or not, and if you acknowledge that, then you also need to acknowledge that all politics are local, and you need to be engaging directly with the decision makers who could very well be the ones that say this can or can't happen in your area. So I just heavily encourage folks to get involved locally. Obviously, there's still a lot to learn, but right now, the localities are just learning what psilocybin is and how this program works. And so starting at a very basic fundamental level of education is a great place to start with that. I'll go ahead and stop there.
Is there any interaction in terms of the federal level with what's going on there in terms of licensing requirements, what you're doing, anything at all?
The short answer is no. The state of Oregon just found out its new U.S. attorney nominee that's going to be going through the Senate confirmation process at the federal level. So we'll be paying close attention to that. We've had, conversations with various folks in different agencies at the federal level and continue to have a door open policy in terms of if and when, they want to engage with us, we want to educate them. Concerns that they have are concerns that we often share in terms of not allowing for diversion and really keeping public safety top of mind. I also think that, again, when we put this next to cannabis, it's not necessarily the same issues. Is there, an illegal market for psychedelics? Sure. Is it of the scale of cannabis? I seriously doubt it. And again, I think for the illicit activity is just it's apples to, something that's not even a fruit, in my opinion. So I think, we will continue to work with all levels of government agencies from federal to state to local. It's incredibly important that we have open dialogue with everyone to ensure that the Oregon program is a success and does not impede the success of future states to come. We understand our responsibility of going first, and we take that responsibility incredibly seriously.
Thank you, Sam. Lizzie, can you tell us a little about the business considerations, including banking, taxes, intellectual property, contract enforcement, and leases in particular?
Sure, I can touch on some of those. And while I think that, I agree with Sam that there's not necessarily going to be this, as many issues with things such as diversion, kind of the issues touched on by the Cole memo for cannabis, being that psilocybin is a Schedule I substance under the Controlled Substances Act. There are going to be some things to consider in terms of whether the business has access to banking, the tax implications, lease implications, how to get funding. And I'll touch on those briefly. And while this is based on my experience in the cannabis industry, I do know that these are very separate and different industries, what is happening in Oregon and the cannabis industries around the United States specifically. But taking a cue from that, first I want to touch on banking. So, as many may know, financial institutions have been very reluctant to provide traditional services to cannabis businesses. But those that do generally follow what's called the FinCEN memo. And the FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So this guidance from about 2014 essentially clarified the Bank Secrecy Act expectations for financial institutions that wanted to provide services to marijuana-related businesses. So in other words, it explained how a bank could be consistent with their Bank Secrecy Act obligations, so their reporting obligations, but still provide services to a business that's dealing with a Schedule I substance. So it really boils down to, for those that are offering their services now, to requiring robust and ongoing disclosure requirements. But the important thing to note is that the FinCEN memo is specifically related to marijuana, and there is no similar memo or guidance related to psilocybin. So at this point, I don't think that there's a clear direction on how psilocybin businesses in Oregon will be able to obtain banking services, at least in the beginning. I think that's going to be a difficult hurdle. Another potential issue is taxes. Again, because psilocybin is listed as a Schedule I substance, it means that it will likely be subject to the Internal Revenue Code Section 280E, which basically states in relevant part that no deduction or credit will be allowed in running a business that consists of trafficking a controlled substance. So what this means for a business that would like to get, a licensee in Oregon, whether it's a service center or a manufacturer, that they will likely not be able to deduct all of their ordinary and necessary business expenses related to running a business from their taxable income. So therefore, they will likely be paying higher taxes. In connection with funding, obtaining a commercial loan in the traditional sense from a financial institution kind of goes back to the banking issue, and that may be difficult or perhaps impossible at the beginning, as institutional lenders will likely not extend their credit facility services to psilocybin businesses. In addition, fundraising may implicate securities laws, which can be very complicated and cumbersome. So those are some issues in connection with the funding part. And then for leases, if depending on how many local jurisdictions opt out, there may be a very low inventory depending on where you can actually have some of these license types and the zoning requirements that will be associated with that. But if the applicant doesn't own the facility where they intend to house their license, then they will need something like a lease. And this will require the landowner approval for the use of the property, which leads to potential issues about whether landowners will actually want to lease to psilocybin businesses because there's more risk associated with leasing the property, specifically to a business that is operating with the substance listed under Schedule I of the Controlled Substances Act. In addition, those who do want to lease may charge more per square foot due to increased risk and perhaps low inventory. And that's kind of what I have on those fronts. I don't know if Sam, there's something you wanted to add.
As a recovering commercial broker in the cannabis space that helped open about 60 different spaces at that time. The other thing I'll say about leases is even if you have a landlord who is willing, 9 out of 10 lease spaces are not owned outright by that landlord. They're owned by a bank. The bank holds the note, and the requirement that a landlord acknowledge the use probably often has to go back to the bank, where the bank will say hell no. And so there's ways to navigate that. But this is, again, as I think Lizzie rightfully pointed out, one of probably the biggest hurdles is on the real estate side. And if you have the ability to raise capital to own your building, you should definitely do that. So you don't get gouged on additional specific psilocybin price hikes. And you don't have to deal with traditional banks who, could easily pull the note at any time because you're dealing in a Schedule I substance.
Thank you. And also, if you're looking to get into these industries, make sure that you talk to the proper consultants, including lawyers, to make sure that you protect yourselves in any way you can. Sometimes having an arbitration clause versus not having one can mean the difference between being able to enforce a contract and being stuck with a breach that you can't do anything about. So make sure you have the right team on board when you're forging forward with these things. Sarah, let me turn to you. With all the rules and regulations, putting hurdles on accessibility, despite the measure's goal to promote diversity and accessibility, what can stakeholders do to promote accessibility?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would just want to add a little bit about the manufacturing beforehand, licensing. I think there's a lot of potential home growers here that are wanting to get into this, and this is part of the accessibility issue too. So the good news is you don't need a GMP facility. That means you don't need to have a drug style requirement. You don't need to have vacuum rooms and all these things that only really drug manufacturers have. You do need to have a food grade facility. So that's sort of the entry point to be able to start growing. With the hurdle that I see there is around testing of potency, which is really a sort of unknown. I think we might be the only company that both has a large scale manufacturing of psilocybin truffles and also test them. And it's quite difficult. We need to actually test them in Canada, get an import license because of all these legal issues. And the requirement here from the OHA is to have a 20% variance in your grow. So you need to be able to say, hey, okay, if we're doing some tests on these mushrooms, we're going to get 20% within 20% of the same strength. Maybe that's easier than we think. Maybe it's not. That's a bit of an unknown because these things have really not been done so much with natural substances. And when it comes to the lab, again, we were talking a little bit about, right, the federal and how will labs get licensed. So in order for a lab to be able to do this test that tells us how much psilocybin is in the product, they need what's called a standard to compare the psilocybin that they get access from the company to a standard molecule that they run through a machine that's called an HPLC machine. Now, to get access to that standard, they're quite likely going to need to have a DEA approval. This is a scheduled substance. So this is another thing that labs are going to be needing to deal with, both having the Oregon license that is going to come out, but also they're going to need to get access to these standards of psilocybin and psilocin. Okay, so equity. I think the first thing we need to really do is acknowledge that there's a problem. So many people have been working on this really with the best intentions to make this accessible, to bring local Oregonians from the underground, to bring native tribes into this. But when we actually look even at the survey that Oregon came out with a survey that asked people to fill in, who wants these services, who wants to be facilitators. And we're seeing, especially when it comes to race, really, really low inclusion of minorities. So there is a problem here, and I think we need to start breaking down the problem step by step and figuring out how we as stakeholders, along with community organizers, can start making as big of an impact as we can. Part of it is, can we have tiered prices, right? Like, we see how much most people can actually afford to pay for this. They won't be able to afford the full price for this. So can we come up with a tiered price system where there are lower income prices, where minorities get the availability to actually access these services? Can we have the training costs right now? I have a lot of friends that are super interested in this training, and we're seeing costs that are, around 10K and more. For a lot of people, that's really expensive. Can we have funds that go towards minorities specifically to train them as facilitators? If we want minorities to come and access these services, it's much more likely they'll do so when we have facilitators with the same background that can promote this within their communities. Another thing is the funding, as Lizzie was mentioning, right? It's going to be really hard if you're just a small business owner or a person who's been working a regular job to get access to these funds. And, I need to be a little bit careful because we're a publicly traded company, and anything that we haven't officially disclosed, I can't really talk about, but I can say that we're really working with our advisors and a legal team to really figure out what we can do as a company that does have some funds and is really interested in promoting the equity. And I would really love, I'm going to stick around for the roundtables. And if other companies and other people are interested in this, I would really love to have a deeper discussion, because I think the answer is in the building of coalitions, right? We as one company can just do this much, but we plus another company, plus an NGO, plus a grassroots organization together coming together with this alignment, looking at the problem and focusing on it, maybe we can make a dent.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Sam, Lizzie, do you have anything to add? I don't either. Thank you very much, Sarah. Let me pose the next one to you as well. And this is with regard to Light Holland, who seems to be interested in creating microdosing centers if regulations make this financially feasible. Can you share with us what this would look like?
Yeah, we have a vision here, and we're starting to pilot different types of programs here in the Netherlands. We had a first microdosing or mesodosing, even. Some people did dose a bit more than a microdose with classical music concert. So we have this vision of creating a community that comes together to connect and to explore their minds and increase their mental health together with psilocybin. And if you can imagine something like a regular cafe where people come in the morning, drink their coffee, and then get all hyped up and get to work. But what if we could have instead a center where people could come, do a microdose, do some meditation training, mindfulness, yoga, start building some healthy habits, and then from there go to their work. So that's part of, again, this is a vision. We really don't know how yet this will appear with the regulations, but this is something that I think could really have really big impacts on the world. I read Michael Pollan's book about drinking coffee and how that changed the whole of Europe politics. So if we can get people a little bit off the uppers into a different state of mind, where can that bring us as a society? I'd be really, really excited to see that.
This is, I guess, for Sam, but for the other panelists as well. What do you see as the main obstacles to getting this across the finish line in terms of trying to get to a robust psilocybin and psychedelics market in Oregon?
It's a great question. I think as the first state to move forward in this type of program, we have to acknowledge where we can have success in the short term and where we're going to need to look further out for the broader levels of success. I think right now, a foundation that is based on safety, that acknowledges that there are going to be adverse events, and that we need to have a system that can acknowledge and highlight that, let's say, and if there's 3 to 5 adverse events in every 1,000 people, we need to be able to have a system that shows that and shows how we cared for those people and how we, ensured that our program does not cause burdens for, existing emergency services in cities and counties, right? That's one of the questions that I've heard is, what do we get extra money for emergency services? And the answer is no, you don't. But the goal is for us to be developing our own emergency service response within this program. Again, I think one of the biggest challenges is because psilocybin's Schedule 1, and this is the first time that any state has moved forward with this, there was no money baked into this. And had there been in the measure wouldn't have passed. It's plain and simple. And it's unfortunate. But I do think that one of the misconceptions is that we were going to have this fully funded and subsidized for everyone out of the gate. I wish that could be the case. But I think to Sarah's point, a lot of the opportunities for ensuring access and lowering the current barriers, many of which are put up by regulation, some necessarily, others unnecessarily, is people coming together and creating solutions within community and meeting community members where they are at, acknowledging their needs, and then devising plans to provide solutions. Again, some of those things can be done in regulation. In my opinion, the majority can be done far better in communities that have the flexibility to acknowledge and operate within their own sphere. So I do think that hopefully over time, we'll be able to organize a table and bring insurance companies to it and say, hey, this is the cost benefit analysis that you could potentially see for individuals who may stand to take less SSRIs after psilocybin experience, et cetera, right? So I think there's a lot of things at play here. Over the next 2 years, I think ensuring that we have a solid foundation that can, stand the test of time is going to be incredibly important. If we fail in Oregon, good luck with the rest of the states moving forward, right? Yeah. I mean, it's really all eyes on us. And again, I really emphasize how much we take our responsibility seriously in setting this up in a way to where it doesn't go backwards. And that also means sacrificing some of what we would hope would be, the perfect model, right? Measure 109 is far from a perfect model, but we do believe that it's a foundation to start from. And I think we're all eager to build on top of that foundation to create as much access as possible moving forward.
Well said. You brought up a point. I'm a child of the 80s. We've got to start to wrap up soon, but I just remember Homer Simpson, and this is going to sound flippant compared to the importance of the thing, but the beer, the source of and solution to all of the world's problems. But you talked about the issue of like emergency services and things like that you have to deal with. But you have something like this that also plays in on the other side of it in terms of this is a solution to a lot of health issues. It's a tool to alleviate a lot of health issues that often people are medicated and dealing with in a much more self-destructive ways. So you have something here that helps. It's just a fascinating discussion to me, but very, very interesting perspective. We do have to wrap up here. So any final words or advice for people in this space? Sarah, why don't we start with you? Any final words?
I could give the advice I give myself all the time: patience. Sam is saying this is a lot of eyes. So many, I'm so passionate about this. So many people are so passionate about seeing the legal doors open, the stigma broken. But this is not going to start on day one of the regulations. It's going to take longer than any of us want. But so just perseverance, patience and perseverance, step by step.
Lizzie?
I was muted. I do echo Sarah, and I have to say I remind myself that as well, to have patience and take a deep breath. But I also think that moving forward, to echo kind of what Sam said, get involved locally, pay attention to what's happening, and if you can attend some of the meetings, they're the ones that are open to the public, and be part of the rulemaking process. That's why they have the public comment, so that you can submit your input, and and then we'll have to keep in mind that nothing is permanent. So things that perhaps aren't working, it's hard to tell that from the standpoint right now, because this is really, you know, a one of a kind first stab at this sort of framework. So if something's not working, then let's figure out through discussion and through, you know, getting together, figuring out how to change it for the better. So, you know, I know that the final rules may seem final, but we can always, I think, build on those based on how things work in real life.
Yes, and thank you, Lizzie. We lost Sam for a moment. I hope we get him back. But I can tell you that we currently do have rules, and in my opinion, those rules do not work very well in terms of prohibition and things like that. So this is clearly a step in the right direction, but certainly also we have to proceed with caution. And I think this seminar was a step in the right direction. Sam, thank you for coming back and joining us again. Sorry for all the technical difficulties to our audience. Sam, do you have any final words you want to leave us with? Nope. Is he frozen? Yep, this was going to wrap it all up, people, by the way. But unfortunately, I think we're going to have to leave without any help from Sam. But I believe we do have some roundtables. Also, I'm going to ask Sarah and Lizzie and Sam to point to where you can find more information from them and potentially how to follow up and ask questions with them. And hopefully we can do that in the roundtable as well. If not, please reach out to me. I'll put my email in here and certainly try and make everyone available. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think that's it. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for joining. Thank you all to the panelists. Sam Chapman had a little bit of a connection issue there. I'll read his comment from the chat. Do your diligence on rules and the measure. So probably got to read it a number of times before we know where we really stand. And thank you, everybody. This is really insightful, a little bit sobering, unfortunately. And yeah, it's good to bring some realism to all our optimism. So yeah, again, thank you all. We have about 30 minutes to spend at our tables in the lobby, and we'll see you there. And right after that, we'll have some conversations about opportunities and challenges in the ketamine space.